Rugby 22 is a sports simulation game designed around the sport of rugby, developed by Eco Software and published by Nakon. Released on January 27th, 2022, it's a modern sequel to Eco Software's earlier iteration, Rugby 20, which released just over 2 years earlier on January 23rd, 2020. Rugby 22 promised to be a fantastic addition to the list of rugby games that in the past have been pretty hit and miss. In the build-up to release of Rugby 22, it was apparent the game franchise was under new publishers Nakon as opposed to Big Ben Interactive, who published Rugby 20. With Eco Software remaining as the developer and with a large studio like Nakon now backing the game, it did make a lot of customers believe Rugby 22 might be the best rugby game ever released. With such a fantastic skeleton of Rugby 20 to work from and a larger budget and reach of a publisher such as Nakon, the game found itself in a brilliant position to hit the claim of being the true rugby experience. But even prior to release, something about the game felt off. 12 months on, the game has been abandoned by the studio, the game feeling unfinished, a multiplayer absent of any other players, and a player base confused at what made this game miss the mark. Before we jump too far into the video, I want to make it aware the purpose of this video is to review everything that Rugby 22 brought to the table and give a comprehensive breakdown of the game's positive and negative attributes. Hopefully this will help any gamers that are still on the fence about picking up the game as to whether it's worth their money or not picking up now. And to hopefully feature as a piece of online media from a true rugby fan who loves rugby, who loves video games, and has a YouTube channel with a dedicated subscriber base to rugby and the game genre. I hope this video will serve and be used as direct feedback to the current developers, producers, and any future developers of rugby games into gaining an insight into what makes a rugby game the best it can be from a player and customer perspective. After writing this script for this video, I realized amongst all the positive elements this game has, there were far more negatives than I thought there were going to be when I sat down to first make this video. I truly hope that if anyone affiliated with this game ever has the opportunity to take the time to sit down and watch this video, they do not take it as blanket negative criticism for the sake of criticism, but instead to take it on as genuine, honest feedback. I've tried in as many sections as possible to present realistic, feasible alternatives to areas of the game where I think it needs improvement, and to hopefully, in some small way, help in the future to produce a rugby game that we can all claim is the best rugby game of all time. I'll head it off of the past now and say I'm in no way affiliated with the game or the teams that made the game, and therefore I'm going to be given a brutally honest review about this game to give you a true representation of my thoughts as a completely independent body. I really hope doing a review video such as this doesn't impact any future collaborations a company may wish to have with the channel on future rugby gaming projects, but I know some companies simply disregard anything than pure praise when it comes to their work, but if no one speaks up about the improvements a game needs along with the positives, nothing will ever improve. And I wish more people would actually make content that draws attention to the areas that require improvement, and companies treat it as customer feedback and potentially take it on board for the next project. If you've clicked on the video because you want to see a direct review about Rugby 22 alone, including its attributes, mechanics, teams, campaign, and a host of other subsections, I'll put a timestamp on screen for you guys now so that you can jump to that part of the video to cover all those things. I will, however, be making numerous references during those sections that I'll go over more in depth right now before we get to that point. For those of you who are still with me, I want to set the table a bit more about how Rugby 22 came about, my experience with rugby games leading up to it, and to cover just how bad the release of this game actually was. I already know from the length of the script that this video is going to be a long one, so feel free to chuck it on in the background podcast style or come back to it in sections if it's too much to watch all in one go. Videos like this take a massive amount of work to actually make, so if you find any part of the video helpful, make sure to drop the video a like. And if you've got any thoughts about the game itself, or you think I've missed anything out on the review, feel free to drop it down in the comment section below. Remember, of course, you can also subscribe to the channel. There will always be rugby gaming content coming out on this channel in one way or another, whether it's videos or with streams. And with that out of the way, go and grab your bucket of popcorn or crack open a nice cold beer, and let's dive into this one. I have played rugby games throughout my entire life, and while I've not played every single one, there are some noticeable high and low points in the rugby gaming world. When most people mention the best rugby game ever, the conversation tends to always steer itself towards Jonah Lomu or Rugby 08. And while both are brilliant games, people still claim these beat any modern games, but I believe there's a bit of a nostalgia factor when it comes to this game that can occasionally cloud people's enjoyment of modern rugby games. We played those games when we were younger, had less responsibilities, more time to master the game, and quite simply had more fun and leniency towards the faults and exploits those games had from over a decade ago. For me, one of the best rugby games is actually one that got quite mixed reviews: Rugby World Cup 2011. Rugby World Cup 2011 is a truly fantastic game that really feels like it was designed with the player and the sport of rugby in mind. As a 12-year-old game, it of course has some obvious flaws by today's standards. The gameplay visuals look extremely dated, all of the players from the licensed teams probably no longer play, modern rules like 50-22 aren't in the game, and there are some glitches that can detract from the gameplay. But overall, the mechanics of the game are incredible. 3 different difficulty settings that allow the difficulty curve to ramp up, an actual fatigue system that makes players commit more mistakes later on in the game as their stamina drops, along with genuine impact depending on weather conditions, 4-player local multiplayer to play the game with a group of friends, a player editor allowing you to change the player's stats to whatever value you like, including changing the players' names to modernize the player roster, and a rewarding depth to the game that allows experienced players to take on larger and larger challenges, and to use the game's mechanics to adapt the game to fit their playstyle and counter their opponents. If you've never played Rugby 2011 and have a working Xbox 360 or a PS3 and you are able to look past the 12-year-old graphics and old player names, I highly recommend picking up that game and sinking a number of hours into the game. The longer you play and the higher difficulty you compete at, the more there is to experience. If a developer could take the mechanics of that game, modernize the graphics, add maybe like a club league system, and fix a handful of glitches and release that game tomorrow, I would happily pick it up on day one. Rugby 2015 was a garbage fire of a game, and the less we say about it, the better. I know rugby challenge games are well respected in their own right, but I'll be completely honest, I've never played 3 or 4 due to the lack of international licenses and some game mechanics that involve slowing down time, like something out of X-Men, and a personal hang-up of mine that I've never really enjoyed of having the camera positioned behind the team rather than a sideline camera. Combine all this with the fact that the games are rarely on sale and they've got some pretty mixed reviews. I just don't want to pick up those games at the full price multiple years post-release. The launch of Rugby 20 heralded the potential for the best rugby game in a decade and had probably the best organised release of any rugby game I have ever played. Prior to release, gamers were offered the ability to pre-order the game. Pre-ordering the game not only secured sales for the developers, but it also allowed players to play in a 3-phase beta of the game. This is a fantastic win-win scenario, and upon learning this, I immediately pre-ordered along with many others in order just to play this beta. Each version of the beta showed what the game had to offer, and you were able to give feedback and bug reports back to the developers to help improve the game all the while allowing early access to true fans of the genre. The ability to give something back to the community for showing support of the game was a fantastic move and enjoyed by many as a method of giving the player base a taster of what the game had to offer. Upon release, they doubled down on the game features by adding in licensed club level teams, customizable set plays, buyable player packs, and a campaign-style ultimate team, allowing you to make a team of your favourite players and take them on a journey to compete against the best clubs in the world. The game was a very welcome addition to the list of rugby games, but it did also have its own share of flaws. The game difficulty was far too low, even on the hardest difficulty. It felt like you almost had to intentionally let your opponent score against you or play against an incredibly higher ranked team in order to actually concede points. The ruck system was a bit too one-dimensional and ended up being an easy mechanic to win every time, and there was a number of graphical glitches along with game-breaking teleportation and T-posing characters. The majority of the set play simply didn't work due to the length of the animations and the lack of official licenses for some of the biggest rugby teams in the world left a number of gamers feeling slightly underwhelmed. But overall, it was an enjoyable time and a great starting point for the developers to improve upon in the sequel. Or so we thought. This next section of the video is going to come off as a bit of a rant. For all the positive things I had to say about the launch of Rugby 20, I can't say any of them about Rugby 22. Rugby 22 had a disastrous release by comparison to Rugby 20. I covered the game on the channel all the way from its initial announcement all the way through to release. And with any positive announcement came a negative that directly impacted the launch of the game. Prior to release, the marketing for this game stated Rugby 22 would host all new, never-before-seen tournaments, new licenses for some of the biggest names in World Rugby, over 60 official teams, a new difficulty system, improved photorealistic player models to resemble their real-world counterparts, and a true rugby experience. And they achieved about half of these. New licenses for some of the biggest teams was supported by the big announcement. Rugby 22 had secured the New Zealand and Australian licenses from Rugby Challenge 4. However, they did not secure England, the Springboks, or Argentina licenses. And so the game is still missing 3 of the top 10 teams in the world. And it seems so much cash was included in securing the 2 big teams, they lost the licenses to a number of lower tier teams that were included in Rugby 20, including Samoa, Tonga, USA, Russia, Canada, and Namibia, which as a player who enjoys the challenge of playing tournaments with lower ranked teams, I felt really disappointed to know none of them would be included in this game. The trailer showing off the improved graphics for the player models was truly staggering. The French and New Zealand players look great, and when you compare the visuals side by side with Rugby 20, you can see just how much better the graphics and character models look in the trailer. After watching this, it made me really excited to see all the other international teams meet this high quality of character model upgrades and to play with some of my favourite teams. Only to discover on release that this player model enhancement was only applied to French and New Zealand teams. The other player models were pretty standard, with minor enhancements to reflect the players in real life. Another big positive claim, but then only delivered a small percentage of what was actually claimed. The new tournaments never seen before that they claimed to be included in the game simply meant the inclusion of the United Rugby Championship. This tournament was previously known as the Pro 4 Teams, which was actually included in Rugby 20 before the tournament was rebranded a year later in 2021. And as Rugby 22 is the only game to have been released since the rebrand of that tournament, the claim is technically correct, but it's not actually an addition of a brand new tournament. Combine this with the fact there are no improvements to the club system or the official inclusion of a World Cup, alongside actually losing the Gallagher Premiership licenses that were included in Rugby 20. This meant I actually feel like Rugby 22 took a backward step in regards to the tournaments they had to offer. The claim of 60 official teams prior to launch was simply a lie and had to sporadically be changed prior to release after losing the licenses to the English clubs to now being over 50 teams, a significant drop when you compare it to the team roster present in Rugby 20. All of these things were topped off by the fact that pre-ordering the game offered the customer nothing. In fact, it was less than nothing. It's the first game I've ever bought where the pre-order was, in fact, worse than waiting for the official release of the game. Pre-ordering the game on console meant the game would be sent out on a physical copy and would be delivered by post on the day of release. Unlike Rugby 20, which was a digital-only pre-order, Rugby 22 did not offer any digital pre-order for console, meaning if you pre-ordered the game, you were forced to have a physical copy of the disc. This meant that on the day of release, you had to wait for it to arrive by post and then wait while the disc installed on your console. Owning the disc does not allow you a free copy of the game digitally, and having the disc copy means the game cannot be played without the disc present at all times. Rugby 22 does not have a contact page that responds about this physical-only pre-order, and their social media pages refuse to acknowledge whether the game would ever be available on digital copy for consoles. As a content creator on YouTube who needed access to the game, I was forced to pre-order the game on disc copy for Xbox. With the game being on disc, it also meant there was no online beta to have early access to the game, and no bonus or rewards on the game once you actually received it, meaning that pre-ordering the game offered the customer nothing for their £50 retail price, bar the only certified promise you would have the game on the day of release. To make this even worse, on the day of release, after months of silences from the producers and no obvious signs on the console marketplaces it would be in digital copy, it did in fact release for digital download on the release date and had a 10% discount on release day, meaning pre-ordering the game meant you had to have the physical disc copy. Having the disc meant you had to wait for the post to arrive that day as opposed to downloading it digitally from an online store as soon as it was available. It cost more to pre-order the game than it did to buy on the release day digitally, and on top of that, you didn't get any bonus or reward, early access or beta prior to release. So after supporting the company by securing them a pre-order, it meant hardcore supporters of the game actually got screwed by the company they were supporting by supporting them. Something else to mention about this bizarre marketing strategy is the box art itself. Seeing as I was one of the idiots who pre-ordered the game, I have it to hand. And to be fair, the box art on the front is perfectly fine, if relatively basic. A background of red and white with 3 players on the front of it. It looks fine on the face of it, even if it takes just over 3 minutes to actually make it from scratch. How do I know this? Well, that's because for fun, I decided to attempt to make the same box art from scratch myself using assets from Google and a free graphics software online, and that's how long it took me. After just 3 minutes and 5 seconds, I think I got pretty close to the final result. Something even crazier to mention here is the fact that when the game was actually released, Cheslin Colby, the man in the center of the front cover, wasn't even included as a playable player in the game. So the front cover was basic and not even correct on launch, but, you know, perfectly fine as box art goes. The back of the box, however, is truly awful. I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here. I have in my hands the box art for Rugby 22 that came out last year, and Rugby World Cup 2011, a game that came out over a decade ago. I'm going to put the in-game images present on the back of the boxes on screen side by side. Now you tell me which game came out last year compared to a decade-old game based purely on the graphics in these pictures. If you said the generic players in unlicensed kits in overly lit stock images was a game that came out 12 years ago, you'd be wrong. Those images are taken from the most modern rugby game on the market at the moment. Truly shocking that the in-game pictures from a 12-year-old game stand out to the most modern rugby game on the market today. Rugby 22 had licensed teams and photorealistic players, but no, they went with stock images of what looks like they were taken from the game in alpha as their official box art images. And on top of that, they use other images of the same quality as just basic marketing for their game to this very day. If I saw this game on a shelf for the first time in a shop, I would legitimately think it was a low-budget indie or rip-off rugby game. Accompanying these terrible pictures is also no information about the game. Just phrases like, master the game, create your own team, take your club to the top. Just slogans. No information about what the game offers or attributes that make you want to buy it. They also changed the marketing on the back to over 50 official teams after advertising there were over 60 when I pre-ordered the game. Only having 10 international teams makes the box look empty, with just a large white box to fill the dead space. And on top of it all, this is how I learned that this game can only cope with two-person local multiplayer. Rugby 2011 that came out a decade ago could handle 4-player local co-op. Why can I not do that now? What if I have friends and we all want to play the game? Screw them. They can all go buy their own game. It's just terrible. The fact that this low-effort attempt at creating marketable box art ever made it onto the shelves is appalling. The fact multiple people set eyes on this and deemed it acceptable is either a sign of lack of care or lack of pride in their own work, in my opinion. The thing I don't get is, with this disastrous release, lack of beta, poor marketing, terrible box art, loss of licenses, lack of communication from the developers, and just this protruding lack of faith in the game, it made it seem like this game would be terrible, and everyone involved was just attempting to sweep it under the rug and wash their hands of it. And yet, the gameplay itself is actually pretty damn good. Playing matches between big licensed teams works pretty well mechanically, and visuals have had a nice upgrade to coincide. Unfortunately, much like the build-up to the release, lots of these strong positives go hand in hand with some areas that could really use some improvements. So with that ridiculous intro rant out of the way, let's talk about what Rugby 22 has to offer the rugby gaming world. Rugby 22 is a sequel game to Rugby 20 and so has had a number of revamps along the way. Some good, some not so good. Gone are the clean-cut lines and boxes of Rugby 20 with its warm and welcoming colour palette alongside its obvious and well-organised clean menu system. Rugby 22's menu is now split up into 9 pickable options laid out in a selection wheel style around the animation of Antoine Dupont tackling Aaron Smith. The animation is actually pretty cool and does change each time you go back to the main menu. The audio that goes along with it also makes it feel like a really big impact. I actually really like it, but after a while it does get a little stale. The easiest way around this surely would have been to have had the animation pick random licensed players in the game to tackle each other. That way the animation would be very unique every time and not get boring. Even if the team selection was locked to France and New Zealand, being the only teams to have been given the photorealistic makeover, you could still have the animation switch up between French and All Blacks players to give a bit of variance. But no, you're stuck with the same two players showing DuPont just smashing Aaron Smith on repeat. The selection wheel style of the main menu, in my opinion, is much worse than Rugby 20's menu system. Each section of the scroll wheel takes you to a different section of the game, but with there being 9 sections, it makes the scroll wheel feel lopsided. 5 options on the left and 4 on the right, made even weirder by the fact that the options menu is accessed through clicking down on the analog stick. Why not just make the options menu an extra section to select on the wheel and add it to the right hand side so there are 5 options on each side? The selections aren't even well positioned on the menu. The right hand options are put into larger boxes to make up the extra room for missing one, and the training selection isn't even spaced correctly, making it look even more disjointed. The sections are also all coloured in such a bad way. This dark green and mud brown colour scheme is both boring and doesn't work at all with the vibrant blue to show your selection. This colour scheme is found throughout the game, and we saw it in trailers before release, and it just looks terrible in my opinion. The colour scheme in Rugby 20 was warm, vibrant greens and yellows with a blue neon-style outline around your selected option and looked great. Rugby 22's colour scheme falls kind of flat, and I don't know why these colours were chosen. My best guess would be due to Nakon being a French company, they wanted to include the blue of the French kit as the selection colour, and the green and brown is meant to symbolise the stains on the kit from the grass and the mud they play on. But I feel like I'm giving them too much credit there, and I also think that's a pretty bad reason to choose those colours. I will go through all the options you can select from this main menu individually and broadly go over what's good and bad about each section in my opinion. There are videos on my channel looking at each area super in depth with a video dedicated to each section. I'll add the thumbnails for the respective videos next to each corresponding section now, and they can all be found in the Rugby 22 playlist on my channel. If there's a specific area you want to dive deeper into, you'll know which specific video to watch. Starting off in the top left, we have Quick Match, which is an exhibition match between 2 teams picked by the player to play against an AI or local human competitor, and will be the first thing you play when you load up the game, as you're forced to play a match for the first time you start the game as a trial by fire tutorial, and is the section most people will be familiar with in a sports game. You are able to cycle through a large selection of teams from different leagues, including the top 14, Nations Trophy, meaning the international teams, Pro D2, the URC, and finally the Premier League, which is a list of fake created teams meant to represent the English clubs that originally featured in Rugby 20 but were dropped from Rugby 22. You can also choose whether teams play in a home or away kit to avoid kit clashes from teams playing in similar coloured kits, and a choice of 13 unlicensed stadiums to play at, 11 of which were available in Rugby 20, but 2 extra ones is nice. Before kickoff, you have the chance to change your team management, swapping players from your starting 15 and subs bench, along with the reserves players that are not available in the match, along with picking which set play variants you want available, most of which have been carried over from Rugby 20. And finally, the missing options section from the main menu. The option selection is actually pretty broad. You can change the length of a match from 5 minutes right through to a real-world 80-minute match. The difficulty of the AI opponent, which now includes Legend difficulty, which is a great step up from Rugby 20. Turn on or off the in-game rules such as knock-ons, offsides, and having players sent off, and you have a choice between 4 different weather options: day, night, rainy day, and rainy night. Having the option to change the weather is fun and adds some variance to long play sessions. Unfortunately, there's no random option, meaning whichever weather type you pick is the weather conditions you will play in for multiple hours on end, unless you decide to go back to the option screen in between matches and manually change the selection. The weather system also seems to have no real impact on the game besides the visual look to you as the player. It would have been nice if adding weather impacted the game in some way. For example, adding rain could increase how much players drop the ball in a tackle or gave bad passes as the ball is slippery to reflect the impact in real life. Maybe the wind speed could also increase in rainy situations to make judging kicks harder from hand and towards posts, to make the player adapt to the conditions and change their playstyle. But unfortunately, it seems to just be a visual shift on the screen with no real impact. After choosing all your options, you are ready to play, and you can select Kickoff to start the match, which on release was titled Throw Off, which was thankfully changed later in a patch because throw off doesn't mean anything and was a bizarre thing to have there in the first place. After that, you will begin a match the same as any other, which is the real meat of the game, but we will dive more in depth with gameplay later on after covering all the menu options. Online is the section which is where you can search for other players to play in an online multiplayer match. The multiplayer in this game worked far better than Rugby 20's ever did. However, with the player base dropping from this game completely, you may find you're staring at the searching screen for longer than an actual game will last for. I have played a handful of online games, and while a vast improvement on Rugby 20, there does seem to still be a large bias towards the player hosting the game, and more often than not the host will win the majority of rucks and set pieces with little to no effort, making the game rather frustrating online for the other player. Training is actually a really good section for newcomers to the game. Different sections are available for all areas of a live game of rugby and the controls you will need to follow in order to help the player. Some of these training sections are designed really well. I personally really like the passing, kicking and line-out tutorials. They're really good at allowing the player to learn the new mechanics such as the line-out system and allowing you a safe zone to learn how the game takes into consideration how far you want to pass, rather than the sort of laser beam precision passing of Rugby 20. They are well made and prepare the player for a real life game and offer a space to learn controls. Some, however, really don't prepare the player for what to expect in a game. While there's nothing wrong with learning the controls, the player also needs a realistic game scenario to put them into practice. For me, the best way to improve this is to keep the sections of training the same, but then have an additional section of being put in a 1 minute specifically designed section to act like a real game. Let's take the tackling training for example. While it does help you learn how to time tackles and what buttons are used to make tackles, it simply doesn't prepare you for the speed you need to react in real games to make tackles. For me, a good final stage for this would be to put the player in a 1 minute section, stuck in their own 22 while the opponent has the ball and you have to defend from a try being scored. Remove the option completely for the player to be able to perform rucking and turnovers, and that way the player cannot overcommit players in a ruck, leaving a 15-man defence at all times, and you simply spend the full minute defending the opponents from scoring a try, allowing you to get used to the speed of a real game, timing tackles, and also positioning players to remove gaps in your defensive line. This also goes for other training sections, such as the set play tutorial. While it's great to have an empty pitch to practice the button combinations freely, the fact is, much like Rugby 20, the majority of set plays simply do not work in a real game when a blitz defense rushes up on you and stops you mid-animation. Rugby 22 have not fixed the issues from Rugby 20 and just copied and pasted them into this game. But a training session where you actually get to face defenders trying to stop your set plays would let the player learn which ones are best to use for their playstyle. Overall, I would give the training section a 7 out of 10. It does help you learn each section of the game, but not always the best to translate into a real game. Events is effectively a limited time task session. On loading up, you will be presented with a list of tasks to complete in a set amount of time, and completing them will reward you with team packs or SP points. On release, these challenges had some nice variants, ranging from beating a specific team with another specific team, winning a game by so many points, achieving an in-game task such as a drop goal or penalty from a certain range. However, 1 year on, these challenges have become far more basic. There is only ever one challenge. The time limit is incredibly long or just incredibly incorrect, and there really is no pressure for them to be completed. And the challenge itself is now something that will most likely be achieved through general play, such as score a certain number of tries or a certain number of points. Challenges carry over from game to game and can't even really be called a challenge anymore. Not a tab you'll be checking out too often. 2 out of 10, in my opinion. My Missions is a brand new section made for Rugby 22 and is actually quite a lot of fun. It is in essence a challenge menu split up into 4 grids made up of 25 challenges each, which the player can complete by playing the game. There's some nice variants here, ranging from basic passive challenges such as completing a number of passes, score a number of tries, all the way through to winning particular tournaments multiple times. Each tile has multiple stages noted by how many boxes are underneath each mission name, and a column on the left telling the player what requirements need to be met in order to complete each stage. Missions cannot be attempted until completing stage 1 of an adjacent tile to make the challenge unlock, and completing each stage of each mission rewards the player with SP points, R points, customization options for career mode, or even player packs. This mission system is really well made, and apart from a couple of glitched missions on console exclusively, all of them work on PC, and it's a really fun way for the player to compete in challenges as they play. There is no time limit on the missions, and I think it's far superior to the Events tab, and to be honest, I don't know why the 2 tabs weren't merged to make one large Challenges section. You can keep the set missions exactly as they are and simply have a small corner that has a special timed challenge area for what is currently called events. The player can complete them within the given time window as an extra achievement alongside the standard missions. Overall, my missions I would probably rate 8 out of 10. Some of the missions will require tournament completions, which can be found in the League section. League allows you to choose any existing team from different leagues mentioned earlier in Quick Play and take part in that tournament as your favourite team. You will also have to manage your players, including who starts each game and any injuries they pick up along the way. You do have the option to also simulate games if you don't fancy playing, or if a team is ranked much lower and you know it's going to be an easy win and just want to skip it. The simulation is fun to watch to see how your team is performing without you, but unfortunately you can't jump into a game if your team ends up performing surprisingly badly against a lower ranked opponent. Once you simulate it, you're stuck with the outcome, whether good or bad. The leagues are fun as long as your favourite team features in the game. From reading comments and reactions online from a number of England supporters, I can't imagine what it would be like picking up this game and then having to play with a fake English team playing in a fake league. One tournament that misses the mark for me is Rugby 22's version of the World Cup. Same as Rugby 20, neither game had licenses to the World Cup itself, and as such called this league the Nations Series. Unlike Rugby 20, Rugby 22 gets some basic things about the World Cup completely wrong. Nation Series works by you picking the team you want to play as, and you are sorted into random pools to take part in, effectively, the World Cup. There are 4 pools, each with 4 teams, meaning there's only 16 teams competing, unlike at the official World Cup that contains 20. More importantly, they got the pool stages correct in Rugby 20 and somehow got it wrong in the more modern game. Seeing as Rugby 22 lost a lot of licenses to Tier 2 and Tier 3 teams, it seems like to make the World Cup feel more real, they cut the number of teams down in the pools to avoid adding in non-licensed teams, some of which were not only not licensed, but don't even have a fake team to take their place. They've just been dropped from the game entirely. Seeing as that is the case, I don't know why they didn't just make fake teams for many of the other Tier 2 and Tier 3 teams that were not included in the game, improve the roster size for quick matches, and also bulk out their version of the World Cup to make it more realistic. As you play throughout the 16-team World Cup, you compete to finish in the top 2 of the pool, which, seeing as there are only 4 teams in the pool, is not too difficult, and you progress towards the final through elimination rounds as you would expect. After playing 6 games, which may have taken you over an hour to complete entirely, you finally win the World Cup, the pinnacle of rugby achievement, only to be abruptly taken to this screen that just says, "You're the champions." No music, no animation, no celebration, just a text box. Just to prove how weirdly jolting this is, I'll play it unedited in this section for you just to experience it in real time. It's just so lazy and disappointing. It's not just the World Cup either. All the leagues follow the same template. You play numerous games, defeat tough opponents, just to be met with a text box to say you won, and are also handed a bizarrely small amount of SP points as a reward. The lack of effort makes the whole experience feel underwhelming and not worth the time the player puts in. Earlier in the video, I spoke about the game Rugby World Cup 2011. That game did not offer any club-level matches nor any real separate campaign. You were limited solely to playing the World Cup and Northern and Southern Hemisphere tours. By all accounts, it had substantially less to offer than Rugby 22, but I played that game for 10 years solid. It was the first video series ever up on my channel, and I still love going back to it. Picking a team and navigating the World Cup felt like such a hard-fought battle. Beating teams much higher ranked than you, making bonds with some of your players who outperformed others, scoring last-minute tries or drop goals. They became your boys for the playthrough, and seeing them lift the World Cup at the end of it all, seeing the celebration and having the music ramp up is such a rewarding feeling. And I can't wait to play again with a different team. This is just so disappointing by contrast. It actually makes me feel like it's not worth replaying and instead just play quick matches. All in all, I'll give the league section a 4 out of 10. Another thing I think rugby games are missing is the ability to allow the player to create their own tournament. Rugby 22 does not include an accurate World Cup, Six Nations, or Rugby Championship tournament. Seeing as the template already exists for pool stages, elimination stages, point systems, fixture lists, and so on, surely it would be possible to add a create a tournament option where the player could select how many teams they want to take part or specific teams they want to take part, and then out of those teams select which one they want to play as, and then select how many pools or rounds of games there are in the tournament, and then whether the winner is determined by a final playoff or by just coming top of a scoreboard table. That way the game does not need to have official licenses to have the Six Nations or the World Cup. You can just let the player create their own realistic, unofficial tournaments to play by themselves or with friends. Something else that needs a desperate improvement is the reward system for winning any of the tournaments. They are disastrously underwhelming. Winning a full playthrough on the URC that requires up to 25 games to be completed once all the finals are out the way rewards you with a measly 400 SP points. It's just insanity. To put this in perspective, Winning a single game in quick play on amateur difficulty will reward you with a baseline 1000 SP points, meaning it's more worth your time to play one game on the lowest difficulty rather than play 25 games in a tournament to generate SP points. You could also generate the same amount by selling a single 2-star rated player for 500 SP points, which you'll most likely have an abundance of from packs from completing missions along your playthrough. All in all, the rewards you get for completing a tournament just aren't worth the effort. Speaking of which, we need to talk about the My Collections tab. My Collections is the updated card system that was introduced in Rugby 20. Well, when I say updated, it's nearly identical to Rugby 20, and actually kind of made worse afterwards. The system on a whole is a fun equivalency to something like FIFA Ultimate Team that allows the player to buy team packs with their hard-earned SP points with the ability to unpack their favourite players and build their own fantasy team. Players are separated into 3 groups: 1-star, 2-star and 3-star. The star rating feels rather random, and sometimes 1-star players can actually have a higher player rating than 2-star players, and so on. The limitation of only having 3 set ranks also feels extremely limiting. All 3 rankings are worth different amounts. 1-stars are worth 100 SP points, 2-star is worth 500, and 3-star is worth 1000. But by limiting it in such a way, it means all players in their specific bracket are worth the same, even though some 90-odd rated players far exceed low-end 3-star players in terms of stats. Along with the fact that once you have enough 3-star players in your roster, keeping 1- and 2-star players feels incredibly pointless unless you happen to like the real-life player and want them in your team. You may as well sell them all to generate SP points back, as the pack cost versus value of the players is completely disproportional. Buying a 60,000 point epic pack to guarantee you 5 3-star players with a net value of 5,000 SP points is ridiculous. That is a value to cost ratio of just over 8%. There isn't much in life you can buy to only receive 8% of the total price you paid, except maybe pre-ordering Rugby 22 versus now. Considering there's only 3 tiers of players and all the players having to fit broadly into one of the 3, the chance of getting a specific nationality player you're after is hard enough, let alone one very specific player you are after, and failing to get any you can use in your team just feels like a waste of in-game currency. This is made even worse due to the fact that after Rugby 22 lost the licenses to the England club level teams, they had to make a fake league of fake teams, each with their own roster of fake players, meaning your rewards and collections will be saturated with fake England players taking up the opportunity to unpack real world players you want in your team. You also cannot sell them all easily, as when you're scrolling through the player cards you have, they cannot be found by filtering them for England players, meaning you have to manually go through hundreds of them just to sell them, or you use them as fusion fodder. Fusion is a new mechanic added in that allows you to pick a player card and then choose 2 matching star ranking players of the same position as a resource. Doing so then, for some reason, merges those players to boost the stat of the player you initially selected. I like the concept, even if it doesn't make a whole lot of sense right now, to have a mechanic to use cards to boost better players to be even better. But this simply doesn't work. I've tried and tried to understand how to gauge what stats are boosted, and I still have no idea. You pick a player you want boosted. Pick 2 random players as fusion material. It doesn't tell you what the fusion does, only what it costs, and it cannot be undone. It does not tell you what stat will be boosted, by how much, or why those stats. I do not know if different fusion material makes different stats boost. It's just really unintuitive. A better system to me would have been to add in something like coach cards. Coach cards could be acquired from special packs that unlock real-life coaches, or even fake ones if need be. Each coach has a speciality they offer the team as a passive stat, but also has a fusion boost. When making an ultimate team, you could have a section for your coach cards to boost your team passively as a whole, or if you want, fuse a player with a coach card to boost that specific player's specific stats, at the cost of losing the coach card forever, like some sort of private training session with the coach made the player better. This allows the player to focus on whether to have a more cohesive and powerful team or to take their favourite real-world player to a whole new level. The cost of the packs currently in Rugby 22 are also shockingly bad in comparison to Rugby 20. I like the idea that the better the team, the more the pack costs to unlock, but the cost of packs have been drastically increased in Rugby 22. In Rugby 20, the most expensive pack was 67,000 SP points. In Rugby 22, it's 100,000. That is a 50% increase. And on release, the packs used to cost even more. It was double the cost at just under 200,000. And this was only changed in a later patch due to complaints by the player base. Increasing the pack price isn't the worst thing in the world as long as the method to earn in-game currency also improves. But Rugby 22 has actually made it harder to earn SP points, meaning the rewards you earn from games makes buying packs feel like a real grind to earn. Winning a game on Amateur rewards you with 1,000 SP points, 1,400 SP points on Semi-Pro, 2,000 on Pro, and 0 on Legend. I'm not joking. You get 0 points for winning a game on the hardest difficulty. A glitch that has existed since the release of the game and is still not fixed 1 year on. Meaning playing the game on the hardest and arguably most fun difficulty will reward you with nothing for your effort. Or you can notch it down a bit, which allows you to win a game much more comfortably. It's far less challenging or fun, but you gain 2,000 SP points. Even taking that into consideration, that means you will need to play 50 games on a difficulty that may not even be challenging or fun for experienced players to have the opportunity to buy a single New Zealand pack. The team packs themselves reward you with 4 players from that specific team as a whole, meaning you need to buy a minimum of 6 packs to get a full starting 23-man team. That is 300 games on a difficulty you may not even enjoy just to get a starting team of the players you want. And on top of it all, the packs have an astonishingly large chance of rewarding you with duplicate players. Being someone that wants a true rugby experience, I can only use 1 of each player in a team, so having 5 copies of the same player in the bank is just a dumb and a waste of SP points. To finish you off, some players aren't even obtainable in packs. I have opened over 70 New Zealand packs across my playtime, and I have never once unpacked Bowden Barrett. The highest rated fly half in the game is not even obtainable as a player. And that was just one I was targeting. Who knows how many other players that aren't as standout as the top-rated fly half are not available to get in packs. But you can have 5 of the same prop though, so whoop-de-doo. To me, the whole reward and pack system needs reworking. Winning a tournament should reward you with a larger amount of SP points proportional to the amount of games you played and won. I think winning a tournament should also reward you with a team pack of the team you played with, or you played against in the final to reward you for succeeding in a hard-fought final. SP rewards for completing games on higher difficulties needs to be spaced out more, and winning a game on Legends should net you 5,000, if not maybe 8,000 SP points, not the broken 0 points. And on top of that, you should earn extras for scoring tries or completing really hard to do set plays as a bonus for each game. Losing the game should net you significantly lower SP points, so you still get a reward for playing, but keeps the player wanting to play at a difficulty they can cope with and not cheese the reward system. My idea of coach packs is something I really think would work well in the game and would really help make the fusion system make sense. Team packs themselves, to me, should have 3 options. You can either just buy the team pack itself, which gives you any players, or, for a higher cost, a forwards or backs pack that allows you to filter the team for a type of player to help increase the chance of finding the player you want for a higher cost, without making it a case of just simply buying the best one singularly. This already exists in the game when you're buying epic packs and allows you to pick specific positions, so it surely wouldn't be that hard to implement. The number of duplicates also needs a drastic reduction. You should not be allowed to unpack the same player 3 times in a row, especially on expensive packs. Maybe they add a mini chance game to each pack where when you unpack a team pack, each player you unlock is given a tally. The game tracks these tallies, and the next time you open the same pack, any duplicates you have gain another tally and it goes up to 2. Then on the 3rd time you open this pack, if you get the same player again, the tally hits 3 and the card gets a forced reroll to be a player with no tally at all. That way, getting duplicates of lower ranked players would almost make it exciting, as if you can get 3 in a row, there's now an increased chance to unlock one of the best players on the team. The final thing I would change about it is to remove the SP point value from the players entirely. Increase the system to ranking the players out of 5 stars to give it more depth, and instead of having the players have an SP point value, they now gain an R point value. This amount is completely dependent on the player's star rating, overall rank, and their stats. A baseline unpacking of a player has a set value, but upgrading or fusing the card with a coach card increases the R point value displayed so you can sell them later on, effectively treating the player like an investment. These R points then translate directly to the career in-game currency, and buying and selling players in your career makes sense. With R points being mentioned, we need to move on to talk about the final tab of the game, career. Career is effectively an ultimate team style campaign in the game, using the cards you unlocked from packs to build your fantasy team and progress through the leagues to become basically the highest ranked team in the game. You can build your team from player cards you've unlocked or buying them during transfer windows for the second in-game currency of R points. R points are solely used in career mode for all manner of things, including upgrading coaches, healing injured players, and also paying for training to boost player stats, but are completely useless anywhere else in the game and feel underutilized on the whole. Before jumping into the career, you first of all need to create a team in the My Teams tab, which allows you to design up to 4 teams. I have no idea why the limit is 4, it was exactly the same in Rugby 20, and considering you have hundreds of cards, there should be at least the ability to make 10 teams in my opinion. In this section, once you create a team, you are able to customize your team by editing the kit, logo, and even the type of ball you play with. There's some really nice customization options and a real improvement in the variance of options from Rugby 20. If you want a more in-depth look at all the customization options, I have a video in the playlist looking at every available option, which you can look at to get a better look, but to keep the length of this video down, I will say how much more I enjoyed this customization system compared to the Rugby 20 system. One thing to look out for when designing your team is kit clashes. In career mode and in any of the tournament modes, you lose the ability to choose whether teams play in a home or away kit, meaning you won't know until you're in a game whether your team is wearing the exact same colours as your opponent, which makes playing a match really hard to tell the players apart, so it's best to make a kit no other team in the world would ever want to play in. I also wish there was the ability to add logos to your kits, even fake pre-made ones, just to make the kits feel a bit more real rather than just blank blocks of colour would be a big improvement to me. You can also now name your team, which may not sound like a big deal, but you didn't even have the option in Rugby 20 and was a terrible thing to be missed out. In Rugby 22, the option of naming your team has been added and an abbreviation will appear on the scoreboard during the game. But unfortunately, you have to choose from a list of prepared names and not name your own team. I assume this is to avoid people adding swear words to their team name, but I feel like a profanity filter could have worked around that pretty easily. And it does feel really silly to make a brand new team starting in the lowest league with a really low ranking whose team name is the Champions. Yet another thing in this game that saw an improvement, but it just feels like a bit of a half effort involved. After customizing your team, you pick the players from the selection of player cards you've unlocked from packs, and you're ready to start your career. I really feel like this whole section does not need to be a separate entity in the game. It feels like every decision you make here ties in directly to career, and I feel like the kit customization could just be a separate tab inside the career menu when you're beginning a career and have available any time, in case you want to make changes and so on. Another issue with the mechanic of just picking cards you have available is if you've already spent time buying packs and getting good players prior to even starting your career, you will immediately create the best team on the planet, yet be assigned a team rank in the mid-60s and go on to play your career starting in the lowest league with an insanely overpowered team. The simplest way to fix this for me would be to lock players that can be added to your team by their star rank versus the rank of your team. Maybe when you create a team, you have an overall rank in the 60s, you are awarded a team rank of 1 star, and as such you can only use 1-star cards. As you win matches and get promoted through the leagues, your team gains extra stars, allowing you access to add higher ranking players to your team. Maybe if you include my idea of coach cards, one of them may have the passive ability that doesn't directly boost your team, but instead allows you to add players ranked 1 star higher than the star level of your team itself, meaning you don't get a team chemistry boost, but instead you get to add higher ranked players to your team to beat tougher opponents. This would add huge replayability to the career mode, taking your team through 4 full leagues just to have that mega 5-star rated team with your 5-star rated players, as well as limiting the player to competing in games with a potentially under-level team versus some opponents to test how well you play the game, rather than the current system of just adding all the best players right from the get-go and steamrolling all the other teams. The R-point inclusion in Rugby 22 is also kind of bizarre. In Rugby 20, there were bonus and challenge cards. These were really nice inclusions to the game and could also be unlocked in packs. Challenge cards were just that, a challenge set by the game for the player to accomplish within the next match. Maybe to score a required number of tries, maybe to play the game in certain weather conditions, or to score a conversion from a certain range. The cards had 3 uses, and when being used you had to complete the challenge in your next game. Doing so would reward you with bonus experience and SP points. They were fun additions to add a bit more spice to games during long play sessions. In Rugby 22, those cards have been completely removed, along with the XP leveling system for the player, and by removing the leveling system they obviously thought the cards had no place anymore. I think this was incredibly short-sighted. A better option would have been in the career mode to reintroduce the challenge cards and treat them as challenges from a rugby union, treating you, the player, as the coach of the team. There could be challenges to beat certain teams, get to a certain stage in a tournament, beat a team by a certain number of points, maybe even have a PR stunt challenging you to get one of your players to score a hat-trick in the next match. Doing so could gain you extra SP points or packs to help you progress outside the game, but more importantly generate bonus R points to use in the career. This would increase the likelihood of the player wanting to take on these challenges, as R points are so important for progression. It would make games more challenging and exciting for the player, and gives you an in-game target beyond just beating your opponent game after game. Rugby 22 said no to any of these fun or interactive ideas, and instead their method to implement R point rewards was to add a betting system into the game. I'm not joking. On friendly games outside of the tournament window, you will be asked to bet on how many tries you will score against your opponent. And if you achieve this, you get more R points as a reward based on how many R points you bet as a stake. This is a really half-assed attempt of adding something into the game. For one, I'm astonished they wanted to promote what is basically gambling into their own game that simulates a sport where betting on teams when you're a player or a coach is basically against the rules and ethics of rugby. Just ask Rob Howley. Secondly, the system they added makes no sense. The net gain of R points simply isn't worth the risk unless you enter the max bet on the max number of tries to actually gain you a large number of points. With how vital they are for career progression, failing this challenge and losing the R points you bet as a stake is a huge backward step. Meaning for the player, the bet isn't worth the risk, or you have to find a workaround. The workaround being to set the game time to a 20-minute game as opposed to a standard 5-minute game, quadrupling the amount of in-game time you have to score the maximum 10 tries for a bet. Double down on this by adding a 3-star winger to the team who runs circles around lower-end teams, and it's really hard to fail. Meaning the system is no longer important, it's now an exploit. An enormous waste of time and grind for the player just to progress through career. Outside of this betting system, R points are tremendously hard to generate. You can be awarded some through missions, but the bulk will be from betting. I actually really like how the R points are used to improve the coaches and pay for training sessions, and I think it makes sense. But to upgrade one of the 4 coaches to maximum costs 104,171 R points. If you times that by 4 to get all of your coaches to the maximum level, it's going to cost you, the player, 416,684 R points. Let alone paying for injuries, training sessions, and buying players in transfers. For the total cost of doing these upgrades, there simply isn't enough ways to earn them without exploiting this betting system. Rugby 22 also obviously knew this, as the developers also added in a different method of getting R points. Throughout the season, at random week intervals, you'll just be awarded a bulk of R points for nothing. Just for playing the game. It's just lazy, no creativity, no in-game mechanics, just here you go player, thanks for sticking with us. To make this worse, the career mode doesn't actually have any weight behind it. It's all about progressing forwards. It expects the player to play well and make the team better. There is no form of team salary, bonuses for winning, punishment for losing games, no tournament relegation. In fact, you can lose every game in a season and nothing happens. With that in mind, knowing you get bulk R points for simply playing through a season, sadly the quickest way to earn currency in the game is to create a team, start a season, and just simulate every game over and over and over again for the course of 5 or 6 seasons end to end. If you don't mind the flashing screen and the occasional player injury to fix, you can generate as many R points as you like to perform all your coach and player upgrades before engaging with the career mode as intended. There's no punishment for losing and no record kept that you lost any of your games. So what does it matter? You might as well spend 20 minutes simulating games. Whether you win or lose, it doesn't matter, no one will ever know, and it doesn't affect your team in any way. And now you have the currency to buy all the top upgrades in the same time it takes to complete one 10-try betting game safely. Overall, I'm pretty mixed on the career mode. I love the fact new customization options have been added to the team creations, new tournaments have been added along with friendly matches and even optional tournaments such as playing at the World Cup is a good laugh. The introduction of being able to upgrade coaches to enhance their impact on the team whenever you like, as long as you have the cash, is a good concept. And being able to find better players in the transfer market based on your team rank is a good way to stop players from just buying the best players straight away. However, there's not a lot that's brand new to this mode. Most of it is taken directly from Rugby 20 and enhanced in certain ways. You could create teams, R points were already a thing in that game and were easier to obtain. The style of tournament, fixtures, results, they already existed. The method for training players worked better in Rugby 20 than the upgrade system in Rugby 22, and Rugby 20 had the Gallagher Premiership to compete in, as opposed to fake England clubs. The addition of the betting system in Rugby 22 seems pointless and contradictory to rugby values, and the reward versus the risk of engaging fairly with the system without cheating isn't worth doing, and so makes it a pointless exercise. Being limited to 4 teams still seems bizarre for how many player cards you possess. The fact you can name your team is a bonus, but only choosing prepared names as opposed to your own name is simply frustrating. The fact you can add the best players in the game to your team immediately defeats the purpose of taking my club to the top. I'm already the top. I already have the best players before I play my first game. That is no longer a progression-based career, it's just a grind of matches watching my World 15 team demolishing lower-rated teams to unlock top tournaments. It's not fun, it's a bit of a chore. Overall, I'd give the career mode a 6 out of 10. So in terms of everything the game has to offer you from this main menu system 1 year after release, we have a 9-option scroll wheel starting menu. My missions and events could easily have been merged into one option, and I really believe career and my teams could have been merged into one option as well. The fact they weren't feels like they were separated just to make it look like there's more to do in the game than there actually is. Training is useful for new players to learn controls, but don't translate into the pace and the actual way a live game is played, and after the first hour of the game, you will probably find yourself never going back to it outside of upgrading players in career. A league system that feels empty, doesn't capture the real-world counterparts of tournament formats, and also fails to reward you for engaging with any worthwhile amount of SP points. An online section that, unless you're someone like me who does streaming and can literally get someone from the chat to boot up the game to play you, there is simply no player base left. A career system that takes Rugby 20's proof of concept and adds to it slightly, and a My Collection section and pack system taken directly from Rugby 20 and has been changed in ways that make it arguably worse. All of this has been wrapped up in a dreary and poorly designed colour scheme. With all this being said, you might be thinking by now, not only is this game not one of the best rugby games in the world, but it might actually be coming across as it's one of the worst. However, there is something else we need to talk about in Rugby 22. The real meat of the game, the thing that matters above all else. The actual gameplay itself. The actual live gameplay is by far the most important thing when it comes to rating a rugby game. Rugby 22 had the privilege of having a skeleton of Rugby 20 to work from, and I have to say, a lot of the changes made for Rugby 22 are really good. The game as it stands a year on from release is a lot of fun. Now, of course, there are so many different areas of the gameplay itself to cover, there's no real easy way to cover it all, so I'm going to break it down section by section and try to cover as much as possible and give my thoughts as we go. Starting out with passing. Passing has had an overhaul since Rugby 20's laser beam precision passes, and I really like it. The ball is passed backwards on more of a diagonal as you would expect to see, and now allows far more player control, choosing the distance you pass by holding down the bumper for longer to pass further or tap quickly to pass shorter. The distance you pass is indicated by a white marker that shifts along the ground, and depending which player the marker lands next to determines which player receives the ball. The passing tutorial is actually a really good way to display this new precision passing mechanic. You can also hold down the left and right bumpers together to pass the ball directly behind you. This mechanic did actually exist in Rugby 20, and it allows the player to drop the ball into the pocket or even to add your own manual set play loops once you get good enough. The way offloading has been done has also been changed. In Rugby 20, performing an offload was just a bit of a timed event to get the pass away during the tackle, and offloading would bullet pass the ball to the next in line. In Rugby 22, offloads have been changed to be far more realistic. Offloading when a player is on your shoulder allows you to pass the ball, but if you're too far away from support, choosing to offload can cause the player to chuck the ball loosely in that direction, and more often than not will allow an interception. A much more punishing system, but I personally love it. The new passing system is a real positive for the game, and I wish they went even further. As a veteran of these sorts of games, I would love the ability to increase the difficulty of passing to make it so the marker shown on the ground is the exact distance your player will pass. This would make you as the player have to have precision perfect passing and allow a harder challenge for experienced players. There are a couple of issues that still linger with the passing, unfortunately. When in a ruck and opting to drop a player back in the pocket, you are now for some reason locked into passing the ball to that player. No matter how you pass, or even if a better passing option opens, you are locked in, which is frustrating and unnecessary. This wasn't the case in Rugby 20, and I don't know why you would make an aspect like that worse than the original game. Another issue is players standing in the way of passes. This also normally occurs at rucks when you want to pass out wide, but the first receiver is in between, causing you to blast the ball straight into their face and causing a knock-on. These issues have existed since the days of Rugby 20, and it's a real shame for them to be seen copied and pasted into this game and not actually fixed. Speaking of rucks, let's talk about the revised rucking system. Rugby 22 has kept the main bulk of the rucking system, but changed some button inputs. You still press and hold the B button to add multiple players into the ruck, but you now use the left analog stick to commit them with force as opposed to the right analog stick used in Rugby 20. This switch is far better, as now both hands press different buttons as opposed to in Rugby 20, where you had to keep switching your thumb between two buttons repeatedly with one hand. The only thing incorporating the left thumbstick issue brings is the fact that moving the thumbstick after winning the ruck will force your scrum half to pick up the ball and go themselves. Given on harder difficulties, you can be fighting in a ruck milliseconds before it goes your way. A lot of the time you can get caught out in button delay, meaning your scrum half unintentionally picks up the ball and just stands there and gets clattered devoid of support, because you as the player assumed you had simply won the ruck using the left analog stick and you were busy looking for the best possible passing option. For me, a simple fix here would be after winning the ruck, you can either choose to pass the ball from the ruck using the bumpers, or you press the currently unused A button to tell the game you want the scrum half to pick up the ball and run as normal. This would be really easy to implement, and it would remove so many little mistakes. The actual ruck winning system I'm still not really a fan of. It's just a circular bar, and adding players in makes the circle more blue or orange until someone wins it. It feels pretty random as to how I'm winning. Most of the time it's just button mashing until it goes one way or the other. After hours of playing, I still have no idea what makes the impact at ruck time. Is it the player's stats? Is it the player's stamina? The analog stick timing? Sometimes rucks occur where I add 4 men into the ruck and the AI adds 1 and somehow I lose the ball. Sometimes a player is completely isolated, and yet I win it back immediately. The only way to commit a foul at a ruck is by mistiming the jackal using the X button. I like the idea of jackal having a limited time window like in real life, but it doesn't seem to make any impact in the ruck itself, and as such feels like it's a risk not worth taking. For me, I much preferred the way Rugby 2011 handled rucking. In that game, tackling a completely isolated player would allow a quick-time event of pressing the X button. Doing so would perform a jackal and rip the ball and causing a turnover. Missing the QTE meant you proceeded to play the ruck. A great system that captures jackling in real life, split-second decision-making, and most likely only occurring when attacker is isolated from their support. The rucking system also made more sense. You had to rapidly tap A to fill up the bar. If you filled up your bar quickly and to its fullest, you won the ruck or got a turnover. There was, however, the ability for you to tap the A button too much, causing a penalty for hands in the ruck. So you as a player had to react fast while also refraining from pushing it too far and conceding a penalty. All of these things gave a much better representation of rucking than they do in Rugby 22. Off the back of rucking, we may as well talk about set plays. Set plays are unfortunately both one of the main USPs of Rugby 22 and also one of the worst things implemented into the game. Intricate working set plays is something everyone wants to see in a good rugby game, and when Rugby 20 introduced a selection of 21 pre-designed set plays that you could choose from to include in your team, everyone was very excited. But one of the glaring issues was the fact that half of them simply don't work. Rugby 22 unfortunately has not solved this issue, and in fact I think they have gotten worse. All 21 set plays have been carried over from Rugby 20, there's nothing new, including one that's simply a choice of none, as if that should ever be an option as opposed to the player just not using the set plays. The problem with these set plays is the fact that the animations are so long that more often than not, the defensive AI will rush up and tackle you before you ever get them completed. There are a couple like Wide Out, Pod of 3 and Rugby League that do work due to their simplicity, but in terms of the more complex set plays, they simply take too long, the players run too slow or too far forward, and it relies on too much input from the player themselves, coupled with the fact the AI resemble a heat-seeking missile on the ball to ever get it wrong and actually have a gap open up. Just look at some of the examples I've been showing on screen for you guys. Another thing I'm really not a fan of is the bright yellow markers on the floor symbolising where every player will run and when you need to hit the correct pass buttons. For one, I think the visuals are way too over the top on the screen. Secondly, playing a local co-op match and having them pop up on screen means your opponent knows exactly where you're going to pass to. And thirdly, while I like the idea of the player choosing the passes in set plays, having locked sections where they can pass from or the whole move fails is really quite silly. Again, Rugby 2011 for me had a much better and simpler system for set plays. You select the set play you want and the players automatically get in position, the same as in Rugby 22, but without the weird slow down time mechanic. Then the players have an icon above their head to show who will receive the ball based on your selection as a player. Once you select your choice, all the options disappear at once. This allows you as the player to set up the set play, make your own choice of the distribution without the defense knowing which section you have picked, and the rest of the screen is clean of a bunch of yellow outlines. It's simple, quick, clean, and most importantly, they actually work due to the AI keeping their depth as they try to work out your intended target, giving the animation time to complete. There are also set plays for scrums in Rugby 22, but they are pretty pointless. Ironically, these are the only in-game selections you make as a player that don't come with a slow down time mechanic, and it's the only area of the game where slowing down time would be helpful. Trying to select one as the scrum is happening means you most certainly miss the first QTE while trying to select them, putting you on the back foot. The set plays themselves sometimes don't even engage, and most of the options are no better than just playing the ball from the scrum normally. All in all, just sort of worth avoiding them. Moving on to scrums themselves, they are identical to Rugby 20, right down to the animations themselves. Very much like a case of it ain't broke, don't fix it, but I still feel the mini game of moving the analog stick to fill your coloured ball just doesn't have the right energy for a scrum. It's very slow and generic to follow. It doesn't have a very scrum-like feel to it. And due to the way it works, there's not exactly a way to just like annihilate your opponent's scrum and win a penalty by driving them backwards. You just slowly fill the bar and the scrum either moves forwards or backwards depending on which side the bar is filling up on. Nothing to write home about, but there's not a lot that can go wrong with it, I guess. The only thing that's still really annoying is the fact that scrums can be skipped completely. When you put the ball into the scrum, you are given a radial to show what direction you put the ball in. If you point the analog stick to the orange section, which no one would ever do, the ball goes to your opponents. Putting the ball in dead center, which again, no one would ever do, feeds the ball in fairly and you play the scrum. And feeding the ball to the blue section gives you a massive advantage at the scrum. Combine that advantage with if you hit all the QTEs during the setup and you can just hook the ball back to your number 8 without even taking part in the scrum itself. I like the idea of feeding in the ball, but this enormous bar to feed it to your side is really boring when being selected by the analog stick. A better option would be to have a moving arrow and you have to time your button press to enter the ball the best you can without straying too far and giving a penalty away. There is also no way for you to steal your opponent's put in at the scrum by hooking the ball first, and when you engage in the minigame fairly to play out the scrum, it can feel like it goes on for way too long. The other set pieces have also had a bit of a revamp. Lineouts have been copy-pasted from Rugby 20, but with the change of now having a QTE rather than a button mashing competition when you both get the jumping call correct. And to be honest, I much prefer this system, although I'm still not a fan of the slow motion effect when competing. Why can the game not just play at normal speed and have the QTE happen at normal speed? I think it would make it much more fun. Other than that, lineouts work well. You do have the option to choose how you throw the ball, but it's just simply never worth the risk. The mechanic of dummy jumpers is in the game, which I love, and you can throw the ball over the top to catch your opponents out. And on harder difficulties, the outline showing which play your opponent is controlling gets removed, meaning there is less visual clues and you have to specifically watch the players to judge where the ball is going to be thrown. It's a really, really nice touch. I like the lineouts a lot. If they just got rid of the slow motion, I would have no complaints with how it works. Mauling has been improved as well since Rugby 20. When a maul now happens, you have to manually add however many players you want by pressing the B button for each one, and then you have to button mash X to drive the maul forwards. Both players button mash and the bar in the middle acts like a tug of war. If you get the blue to extend beyond the box, you push the maul forwards. If both colours are battling inside the box, the maul is stationary. And if the orange is more dominant, the maul can actually now go backwards even if you have the ball. During the course of the maul, the bar reduces in size and eventually comes to a halt and you are forced to play the ball. This system is a great improvement on the Rugby 20 mechanic. I only wish there was the ability to use set plays or have a forward break away from the maul as opposed to being limited to just the scrum half passing or going themselves. Both of these things can be done in scrums, so I don't think it'd be too hard to implement into mauls. Something that I think does need reworking is the automatic try scoring that occurs when you engage in a 5-meter maul from a lineout. This is a problem brought straight over from Rugby 20. When you jump for a lineout, you can select to enter a maul. As long as you collect the ball or win the QTE, your players will get into a maul and your opponent is forced to engage. If you add players to the maul as soon as possible and you button mash X as fast as you can, it's basically a guaranteed try. The minigame length of the maul to be defended is simply too long for the defending team to have any chance of stopping the maul before you get over the line. But on top of that, before you even get to the line with a maul, a non-optional animation plays where a prop will magically pop out from the middle of the maul and dive around the maul to score a try. This animation is forced by the game by getting the ball within a certain distance of the try line. It cannot be stopped by the attacking player from happening, and the defending team cannot stop the animation or tackle the player once the animation begins. Once you get the maul close to the line, it's a try. Simple as. It really needs to be reworked to remove the animation completely and allow them all to progress and even push the defending team over the try line and let you as the player manually select the scrum half or forward to break away and see if you can score a try with them. The maul try isn't even the only OP mechanic in the game. There are two more of them in the form of sidestepping and grubber kicks. Sidestepping can be done when you have the ball in your hands as the attacking player and when you are a certain distance away from the tackler, moving the right analog stick in a direction. If you point the analog stick towards the tackler, you will perform a handoff and break through the tackle. Any of the other three directions will perform a different sidestep animation based on the player, and rotating the analog stick will make the player perform a spin. All of these actions are based on timing and distance from the defender, and once you have it nailed down, it's an automatic way around a defender and cannot be stopped. Performing any of the actions at the right time, no matter if the player is tackling you, waiting to engage, or just within a certain distance from you, will force the tackler to completely fail or miss the tackle and allow you clear passage. I like the concept of adding in these things, but it shouldn't allow the player to just waltz on by a defender like nothing. At best, for me, the player should need to make the correct decision in which way to point the analog stick. The handoff is fine, but the sidestep should be decided by the player as left or right, and picking the direction that allows the attacker to step away from the defender should increase the chance of breaking the tackle, and picking the wrong way results in a bigger tackle than it would have done had you not attempted it. I also think the animation for successful tackle breaks needs to be changed from just clearly running around the player to the defender engaging in the tackle, but the attacker breaking free. But in doing so has their speed dropped during the tackle to show the effort of breaking the tackle, while at the same time allowing more defenders to get back on the scramble and make a further tackle after the first one has failed. The final OP move is the grubber kick. Grubber kicking is a tricky thing to nail down in rugby games, but Rugby 22's grubber is just kind of ridiculous. When you're running with a winger on a one-on-one position, you can hold down the B button to grubber kick past the defender. As long as you don't kick the ball directly at them, the ball will roll in a perfectly straight line around the defender, who falls to a stationary speed, whilst your winger saunters past to collect or continue kicking along the ground to run it over for an easy try. There needs to be more added to aid the defender to help stopping this tactic, and in a few online games that I did play, it was clear grubber kicks is just the meta, as it's just impossible to stop. Talking of kicks, let's move on to all things kicking. Conversions and penalties are copy-paste from Rugby 20, withdrawing the analog stick to generate power, and then pushing the analog stick forward to initiate the kick, and also select the direction you kick in. It's a hard mechanic to get used to initially, but once you get it nailed down, it actually becomes pretty hard to miss. Something that I think could be removed to make kicks harder is the ability to add curve to the ball. I thought this was a weird addition when it was added into Rugby 20, but to keep it in Rugby 22 seems just as strange. If you miss-aim a kick, you can magically add a bunch of curve to the ball, left or right, like you're taking a free kick in football, and it just allows you to correct for any mistake and slot them over easy. This gives the player way too much leeway with getting kicks over the posts, and I feel it would function better without it, and simply learn to aim better using the stick and paying attention to the wind illustrated on the ground by the markings to help curve the ball using the elements. Wind is also relevant when taking penalty kicks to touch, as judging this wrong can easily see you missing the target or kicking it dead entirely. This is doubled down on by the fact that when you finish positioning your kick, your kicker proceeds to take multiple steps forward, and in doing so completely changes where you selected to kick. It's not as noticeable in the middle of the field, but kicking for a 5-meter line out and having the player take 3 massive steps forward after you aimed it right at the 5-meter flag, plus the wind behind you, can see the ball going dead even when you did everything right. The wind markers unfortunately do not translate to kicking the ball from hand. Kicking the ball from hand actually feels really nice in this game. Turning the camera to the side can really allow you to pick open areas in the backfield where a defender is out of position and play tactically over the top. Up and unders feel pretty lifelike in the way players chase the ball, which is nice. Grubber kicks, while overpowered in situations, do resemble real-world play, and drop goals are achievable with a good animation, but are slightly ruined by the fact that when you go for a drop goal, the game seems to do a bit of an auto-aim towards the posts. That's basically a guaranteed score, also accounting for wind. So actually the less player input actually helps you slot them over. All of the kicks, while a lot of fun, all suffer from the same issues. One big factor being wind. I'm a big fan of having wind passively active in a match, at different speeds and directions to have an impact on the ball. However, in live play, there is absolutely nothing on screen to display which way the wind is blowing. This can be really frustrating when you hoof the ball downfield, hoping the ball will stay infield, only for the wind to blow it over the touchline, handing over the possession and a big territory gain for your opponents. Or when you're attempting to do a box kick in your own 22 to clear your line and desperately need the ball to go out, only for the wind to blow the ball back towards the field and keep you under pressure. If I knew which way the wind was blowing in those situations and how hard, I could aim my kick better, or abort the kick completely, knowing it wasn't going to work, and try something else. It seems like such an easy fix to just put something small on screen in the corner, like an arrow or a weather vane, to show the player how the wind is acting and help you make this judgment. Even more weird is the fact that more often than not, the wind seems to actually be acting in the exact opposite way I was hoping for. So often when performing a box kick, the wind is blowing the wrong way, even though seconds before, in another kick, it was blowing the right way, and sometimes changes whether you're on one side of the pitch or the other. I feel like there might be something coded incorrectly into the game in terms of the ball wanting to remain on the field in most scenarios. It's noticeable in open play that unless you are tackled directly into touch, there seems to be some sort of invisible wall that really fights back against the idea of a player accidentally running into touch. This also carries over to the way the ball bounces at the end of kicks. A grubber kick seems to make the ball bounce in a straight line, but when any other kicking action is performed, when the ball bounces, there seems to be a cognitive ability for the ball to avoid bouncing into touch. You can kick the ball into a mile of open space with the wind behind you and kicking in the perfect way, but 9 times out of 10 the ball will bounce back infield or bounce vertically, allowing the opposition to retrieve it and stop the territory gain. Yet more often than not, if you target the kick slightly incorrectly, meaning if it were to bounce forwards the ball would go dead, 9 out of 10 times the ball magically gains the ability to constantly roll forward in those scenarios and allow the ball to go dead, losing you massive meters and causing a scrum. The other issue with kicking comes from your own teammates. For some reason, no matter what type of kick you are doing, your teammates love to just run directly in front of you and block the kick with their face, causing an offside penalty. It is incredibly frustrating when you're trying to clear your lines or go for a drop goal, only for your prop to run in front of you and hand a penalty to the other team. This also kind of happens with your opponent's players. As soon as you press a kicking option, the players run directly in front of you to block the ball. This is not a charge down. There is a separate animation for that, which is really hard to time. They are not attempting to tackle the player, just stand in front of you to block the kick. The only reason I can think of this happens is the players are coded to run and retrieve a loose ball, and when your player lets go of the ball to kick it, the game believes as it's no longer in possession of the player, the ball has now gone loose and every player in the vicinity, friend or foe, runs in to pick it up. But by the time you arrive, you've finished the kick and you're blasting the ball into their chin. The final issue with kicking comes in the form of retrieving the ball from a kick. Rugby 22 introduced a new QTE when players are under a high ball to give you a better chance of securing it by jumping. While I like the idea in premise, It doesn't look very good visually on the screen, and having a timed marker on screen makes you take attention away from the rest of the game. And more often than not, the graphic on screen completely breaks and is immersion shattering. Personally, I think this could be improved by simply adding a Q2E prompt of the exact same button above the player's head, and it's just a matter of hitting the correct button before your opponent to secure the ball. Or maybe you remove the QuickTime event entirely, like in Rugby 2011, and just make holding the X button down an animation that makes the player jump into the air. Positioning and timing of the button are completely up to you as the player. Getting it all right means you secure the ball, failing to engage with the option leaves the catch up to chance, and poor positioning or timing means you drop the ball in the air or you miss the landing of the ball completely. Following on from this is another issue of once your player has kicked the ball, that player is completely incapable of tackling an opponent player that has caught the ball before you. In order to do either action, you need to switch to another player or switch to a new player and switch back to your original kicker to get around this glitch. This simply wasn't the case in Rugby 20 and it's exclusive to Rugby 22. And it's such a shame that as I'm going through these points, how I'm realizing how many of the positive elements seem to be things that were just copied from Rugby 20, and most of the negatives are locked solely to Rugby 22. Once you find out how to work around these kicking issues, you can implement the mechanic into the game, and it may help you score some really fun tries. The try animations themselves, I believe, are all copied and pasted from Rugby 20. I couldn't find anything that struck me as brand new. The one method of scoring a try I do believe to be new is the ability to reach out and score a try if you're tackled just shy of the line. I don't believe this was in Rugby 20, but it's very hard to play test and record this specific thing, so I may be wrong about it, but it is a welcome addition to a rugby game. So often in games I've been tackled just short of the line and believe if the player reached out they could still score. The final thing to mention about scoring tries is the replay that is shown after scoring. A grievance I had with Rugby 20 was the fact the replays were only a few seconds long and as such didn't show a great deal of how you worked up to the try. Rugby 22 feels like it's sort of overcorrected, and now replays can show up to 3 full phases before you scored a try, and sometimes last so long that the replay ends before actually showing you score the try. For someone like me, who makes content on YouTube and makes thumbnails, something else I'd really like to see added to rugby games is the ability to manage the replays, allowing the person playing to interact with them, change the camera angles, change to a free cam, allowing pause and slow motion, change the focus, add filters, allow us gamers to show off, save and edit our own highlight reels. This is a thing you see in so many different sports games. Rugby 2011 at least allow you to change to multiple camera angles. Heck, I mean, FIFA 2010 on the Nintendo DS allowed you to have a free cam in replays. How can it be that rugby games over a decade later still don't have this option? It just blows my mind. The tackling in Rugby 22 is good for the most part. There's a number of animations, sometimes 2 players tackle 1 player. Timing hits and lining up players from a distance can feel really good. All the players are level enough that even if someone makes a breakaway, you still feel like you have a good opportunity to chase down the man. The tackling system is also, as you probably expect by now, pretty copy-paste from Rugby 20. You have 2 ways to tackle, using the A button for a safe, guaranteed tackle, or using the right analog stick in pointing it towards the player you want to tackle, making your player tackle in that direction. The chance of missing the tackle is increased using this, but the chance of winning the next ruck is also increased when you land the tackle using the stick. With this in mind, it makes any other tackle feel pretty useless. Once you get good enough at using the analog stick, you will just use it for 100% of the tackles. Using the analog stick also has a much larger distance your players can tackle from. You'll know when your player is in range to use a tackle by the colour at the base of their feet, symbolising they are within range. And in my opinion, the range is a little bit too far. It feels really hard in this game to make any sort of clean breaks on higher difficulty, as the range of tackles is so far, the AI pick you off before you can sneak through a gap. Breaking through the line is one of the best things in rugby games, in my opinion. Rugby 20 always felt very sped up, and due to the AI not being as good as they are in Rugby 22, it meant there was so much more space on the field. It was relatively easy to break away or slot a pass into a gap in the defensive line. Rugby 2011 felt even better. The game was so tight defensively that having a breakaway felt like you had caught your opponents off guards and the adrenaline started rushing. Rugby 22 doesn't have that same feeling. The AI is designed to be much better, especially on higher difficulties. The players feel like they are coded to man mark as much as possible, which is very realistic, but sometimes the AI is just too on top of your team. This can be seen on occasion when you attempt a miss pass and the AI runs up to stop your player from running forward, expecting them to receive the ball, but is also not allowed to tackle them without it. So it just ends up looking weird as they run into each other like something out of Rocket League where two players get stuck and just continually drive towards each other. I think some small changes would go a long way in this area of the game. I think if they reduced the range of the tackling down and also added in a system that players on low stamina actually got up off the ground and got to the defensive line slower, it would mean the game had some really tight defense to start off with, but as the game progressed and the players were getting tired, more room would begin to open up, and those breakaway runs would have that little bit more impact into games. The final thing I would really like to see improved in the tackling would be to allow your teammates to also tackle your opponents. Rugby 22 locks the defensive side of the game to be completely up to you as the one playing the game. It's not the worst thing to have the player perform defensive inputs, but it does look pretty stupid when one of your opponents are running next to 3 defenders like they are skipping through a meadow of daisies holding hands together rather than just tackling him. This occurs sometimes when the players are bunched up together and you can lose track of which players you are controlling, or if you miss the tackle yourself. No one covers for you, even if they are right there. This never occurs against the AI, as they don't control one player at a time. It feels like they control all 15 independently at once, so I wish my players did the same. My system around this would be to remove the A button as a tackle option completely. Make all the players have an inbuilt mechanic where if you make a defender touch an attacker by simply running into them, it performs an automatic safe but low impact tackle. And then the analog stick would be used solely by you on the one player you control to go for the big tackles if you are in position. This would help as well with setting up your defensive line, as you wouldn't have to engage in every tackle. You could leave your teammates to make soft tackles and you stay further out wide in case they tried to pass out wide around it. Maybe you double down and you actually remap the A button in defensive circles to actually be your player calling for support to fill in the defensive line. Maybe you tie the circle of influence to call players to link directly to their leadership stat to actually have it mean something. The larger the stat, the larger the area is to call players for support. Tackling, like the sport's real-world counterparts, can also be an area for some controversy when it comes to penalties. When you use the right analog stick for tackling, pointing the stick in the wrong way may not only cause you to miss the tackle, but you may in fact cause a larger illegal tackle that can sometimes result in an injury of a player, but will always result in a yellow card. This system was also brought over from Rugby 20, and I do like the idea that you messing up on the input can result in a yellow card, but I wish this system had more depth to it. There are some nice animations to show the impact of the tackle, and while they are certainly dangerous, I really feel like these tackles would actually result in red cards in real games, not yellows. The highest card you can be awarded in a tackle is locked to a yellow for some reason, and they haven't developed any sort of system where too many penalties against one player also results in a yellow card. Meaning the only way to actually get a card in this game is to perform an illegal tackle, which can feel pretty random as to what I did wrong for my player to actually perform it. A yellow card will remove the player from the pitch for 10 in-game minutes, as is true to the sport. You will be a man down, but on the team management sheet, it will show up that they have a red card next to their name for some reason. Unlike in a real game of rugby, after the 10 minutes is up, the carded player sprints back onto the field in open play and can completely disrupt the game. The number of times I've had a breakaway run only for the carded player to run onto the pitch illegally and tackle my potential try scorer is insane. This broken mechanic was also apparent in Rugby 20, and it's one of the big criticisms I saw in tweets back then. The fact Rugby 22 hasn't fixed this issue is really poor. It either shows a lack of knowledge for the sport itself or a lack of listening to feedback. Players should only be allowed to come onto the pitch after 10 minutes and during a break in the game. Heck, even add an animation to show the carded player coming back onto the field once the ball goes dead that's exactly the same as the substitution. It can't be that hard to add. With yellow cards being a rarity in the game and the highest punishment being a yellow card for a single infringement, you will never see a red card in the game. I don't even know if there is one in the game. With hundreds of hours of playing on both Xbox and PC, I have never seen a red card, so couldn't tell you. The majority of the rules in the game are true to the real world sport. The inclusion of the 50-22 rule is a really nice touch. It's just quite hard to earn due to the ball bouncing issue not going into touch I mentioned earlier. Knock-ons, offsides, forward passes, and even jumping across in the line-out are all included and work pretty well. A couple of knock-ons do get missed from time to time, but I actually quite like that. It feels like the ref has missed it in a live game. The one area of frustration is the fact the game seems to allow the AI to be offside when in a ruck. There are numerous times where I have picked up the ball with my scrum half only for someone in the ruck to just break free and tackle him instantly. If you are in the ruck, you're clearly not behind the ruck, and so the player should not be allowed to make the tackle, and the game never gives an offside penalty, which is really annoying. Visually, the game looks really nice. There is a clear step up when playing the game between Rugby 20 and Rugby 22. I have, however, noticed that it looks so much better on PC compared to console. In one of the patch notes, Rugby 22 did announce they were changing the graphics on console due to it being hard to run and causing more issues. Console gameplay seems to have more blur and exposed white colour along with flickering in players' hair. The PC version looks great and looks really clean on a good monitor. It can be a bit tricky to capture the quality when doing a video like this, but in terms of recommendation, I 100% recommend getting this game on PC rather than on console. The in-game visuals hold up well for the majority of the time I've played. I've not really experienced major screen tear or full-on game freezing. A couple of graphical glitches still ruin some immersion for me. The earlier mentioned catching QTE looks weird on screen, and a couple of times when using the side camera, you can experience an issue where your choice of selection at the line-out or penalty is either nearly not visible or off-screen completely, and you are just left staring at players and you may think your game is crashing, when in reality it's just the game waiting for you to make a decision, and you better hope you remember the options and their corresponding buttons. The scoreboard in the corner looks fine, but I think it's a bit basic. I wish there was a bit more about it to make it feel more like a TV coverage graphic than just a basic timer in the corner. Maybe even periodically coming up with fun stats about the game like possession or territory. And as I mentioned earlier, I wish there was something on screen to show the wind direction. One of the big selling points about this game was the addition of a new level of difficulty added to the game. No one was happier about this than me, as Rugby 20 was just a walkover game once you got used to the controls. Legend difficulty adds a whole new step up for experienced players, and I have to say, I do actually really enjoy the challenge, and it's now the only difficulty I play on. The only downside about the new difficulty is the step up from Pro to Legend just seems to be the fact that the AI is capable of doing things you are not. On Legend difficulty, you will see an incredible number of tackle breaks by every AI player who is carrying the ball, and in some games it's just default whoever makes the first tackle just falls off. Rucking requires the AI to do almost nothing to win a ruck, and sometimes you can have 3 times the amount of players in a ruck and still not win. At scrum time, the opponent's circle fills up whether they are hitting the marker or not, whereas you have to be within the circle to gain anything, meaning their scrums are basically 100% flawless and feel difficult to stand a chance against. On the flip side to your opponents, your teammates seem to actually play worse. You will encounter far more gaps in your defensive line, or defenders just stood in a group, allowing easy meters for your opponent. And don't even get me started kicking at posts. The AI simply cannot miss a kick on Legend difficulty. This is best proven when drawing a match, you go into extra time, and if you still draw by the end of that, you go into a penalty shootout. A rarity in rugby anyway, but it's nice it is included in the game. But on Legend difficulty, once you get here, you may as well just concede. The AI cannot miss, and the longest run I have ever had in full concentration mode in a penalty kick shootout was 17 completed kicks. 17 is ludicrous. I hit the post on my 18th kick, and of course the AI slotted it through the middle. The increased difficulty is nice to have in the game, but I really wish it was a case of the AI stepping up a notch. Maybe paying attention to my playstyle and adapting to it. Maybe finding exploits in your game style and punishing you with them. Maybe taking penalties or drop goals to put you under pressure on the scoreboard. But at the minute, it feels like you are playing on pro difficulty, but the opponent has cheats enabled, allowing them to win more scrums and rucks, never missing a kick, and for some reason your teammates aid them in beating you. A nice addition to the game, and certainly the most challenging, but I do feel it needs some tweaking. On the whole, I do enjoy the gameplay of Rugby 22. Even with all the criticisms along the way, I do feel that the gameplay itself is an improvement on Rugby 20. But one thing that's still apparent to me is over the course of writing this script is just how much I've repeatedly mentioned how this game has just taken assets from Rugby 20 and tweaked them slightly and called it a new game. And that is what I expected when it came to this game coming out, but maybe not quite so blatantly. It feels like almost every positive thing I have to say about Rugby 22 is actually a positive about Rugby 20 that was brought over, and any negative criticism is either brand new to Rugby 22 or it existed in Rugby 20 and never got fixed. I feel like had I never played Rugby 20, Rugby 22 would actually feel like an extremely fun game, and I would have far less to complain about. But when you release a game for £50 only to find out that the majority of everything good about it came out in a game that existed 2 years ago, it just damages my view as a customer on the new release. Just to put it into perspective, I will give a list of every genuine, positive, original thing Rugby 22 consists of. The visual enhancement of the game compared to Rugby 20 is so much better, along with the upgraded player models. The addition of New Zealand and Australian international teams is great, but it's a bit muddied by the fact it came at the cost of so many Tier 2 and 3 nation licenses and the entirety of a whole league, which is a bit annoying. The My Missions section is a really great addition to help the player work towards challenges and earn extra rewards. I do like the style of playing the career and choosing which leagues you take part in, along with being able to upgrade the staff at any time, but the problems with R points can make it feel like a bit of a chore. The new line-out winning and maul mechanics are better than in Rugby 20's button mashing concept. The way the players pass and offload feels like it's better paced and more realistic. The addition of reaching for a try is good even if it doesn't work all the time, and the addition of a new difficulty level makes the game challenging and fun for players of my experience. And that's it. Those 8 things, and even a couple of those have had negatives attached. Everything else is just what already existed in Rugby 20 and is tweaked, mildly enhanced, or on a lot of occasions simply made worse. Now, this review is looking at the game 1 year from release, and unlike other reviews that came out on day 1, I get to know the life cycle of the game. On release, there were even more issues: bugs, game freezes, players playing in the wrong positions, Players did not know how to turn around and moonwalked backwards in defense. Unlicensed team kits didn't even look remotely like their real-world counterparts, and key players were missing from teams. A positive for this game was the fact that for a few months, large patches were released for the game that fixed a lot of these issues. But with every set of patch notes that came out, it made it feel more and more like these patches were just fixing things that should have been included in the game at launch. They felt like the same patch notes we were seeing in the beta phase of Rugby 20. I mean, it took them 2 months to add in Jackling Colby, you know, the guy whose face is slap bang in the middle of the box art. But nonetheless, at least the developers were still updating and supporting the game post-release. Or so we thought. As after the March update, the developers simply abandoned the game in the state it was in. We got to see a video of Antoine Dupont playing this game after the patch, and then the developers fell silent. Apparently Jackling Colby was actually meant to be in this video too, but they just forgot him. That's a joke, but you never know. After they abandoned the game in March, this is what we're left with. And while there's a lot of aspects I do really enjoy about this game, it just doesn't feel like its own standalone game in the world of rugby video games. The front of the box may call this game Rugby 22, but really it should be looked at as Rugby 20.2. It's just a brand new, really big patch, put on a new disc and wrapped up in some pretty rubbish box art and called a new game. In terms of recommendations for this game, if you can pick it up cheap on PC, like I did for £8 when it was on sale, I 100% recommend picking up this game. There's plenty to fill your time with the addition of some big teams. There's a lot of fun to do exhibition matches with a friend, and the career mode has quite a lot to offer if you engage with it completely faithfully and don't just cheat the system. I also would say if you never played Rugby 20, I would absolutely recommend this game to you. I feel like so many of the comparisons I've made in this video are mechanics that already existed in that game, and because they weren't enhanced in this one, it annoys me a bit. But if you never played Rugby 20 and you come into playing Rugby 22 with a fresh set of eyes, I'm sure you'll genuinely get far more enjoyment out of it. In terms of the video itself then, is Rugby 22 the best rugby game ever? No. But overall, it's still better than a lot of other rugby games I have played. Given all the positive and negatives, I would recommend picking this one up over Rugby 20 at this point, and it does have a lot more licenses attached to it than the Rugby Challenge games, and the mechanics are pretty solid for the majority of the time. Having been involved with this game since its initial announcement last year all the way through to the final product that we have now, Rugby 22, to me, still doesn't outperform a game like Rugby 2011. And I'm sure for many people watching, it may even go further back than that in terms of your own point of view. 1 year on, looking at where this game came from to where it's at now, my overall rating for this game is going to be 6.5 out of 10. It's still a good game and it has a lot to offer in terms of filling your time and enjoying and playing with some big team licenses, but I just can't give it that coveted top spot. With no sight of Rugby 23 or a new World Cup game on the horizon anytime soon, it's very likely Rugby 22 might be the last iteration of a rugby game we have for a while. The wait continues for us all as rugby fans to play a game that can meet the claim of being a true rugby experience. And I just hope that the next rugby game has the developers' faith and passion to stick with it and keep supporting and give all us fans the rugby game we deserve.